Good number. How many of you are newcomers? Okay, how new?
About a year, 2 years.
Okay, so just got your feet on the ground being in Decatur. How many of you have, walked around downtown in the historic areas and kind of know what's going on there? A little bit? Okay. How many of you have never been downtown? Okay. I highly recommend you go there, and I'm gonna hopefully share a little bit about what's going on down there and what a treasure we have. Let me tell you a little bit about myself so you'll know where I come from. This is all about why you have history, you know where you came from and hopefully where you're going. I am a Red Raider, graduated from Decatur High in 1968. Wow. Woo! So I'm historic. And you will be too. You'll be there faster than you realize. I am a registered interior designer, and I've had a business on Bank Street for 40 years. I have a bachelor's and master's degree from the University of Alabama in interior design. And after I graduated from Alabama, I moved to New Orleans and practiced there for 5 years in the interior design construction career. And I've always loved history and family tree, genealogy, that kind of thing. But New Orleans is such an amazing place. How many of you have been there? It's an older city, of course, than Decatur. Well, yeah, it's about 100 years older than we are, as far as Decatur, 1820s, so we're about as old as the state. And New Orleans is, like I said, about 100 years older than that. Why do you think, looking back on the age of Decatur and our history, why do you think we are that old? It's kind of related to why New Orleans is older. When you think about the development of our country. Yes, it's near water. Think about traveling. We have the interstate, we have the road system and so forth. How do you get to Decatur when there are no roads? By the water. How do you get to New Orleans? How do you get to Mobile? So Alabama was settled kind of from the north down and Mobile up, because people came in, they floated down the river, and then in the case of Decatur, the Tennessee River, how many of y'all have experience on the river? Have you ever ridden in a boat up and down the river? What's all along the river?
Water.
Water. What else?
Trees.
Trees. What's in
Rocks.
the river?
Fish.
Dams. Okay, back when Decatur was developed, or when the first trappers and people came to the area, it was not dammed. So what was between Decatur and Florence, just down here, Quad City?
Bridge.
The dam. What happened on the, what is under the water there? Remember that history? Rocks. The Muscle Shoals, have you ever heard of that? Muscle Shoals, the area between Decatur on the river and the Quad Cities, which is about an hour's drive. If the dams were not there, you could not go by the river to the Quad Cities because you would be going down waterfalls. There's a huge drop in the terrain. The shoals are turbulent water. So, have you heard of St. McGee? He was a riverboat captain. He would, what they call, shoot the rapids sometimes, which was illegal back then. If you were a riverboat driver, you weren't supposed to do that because it was very dangerous. So once the dams went in, the water was raised, and then we had river traffic that could go with no problem. So pretty interesting history. So again, understanding the history of how we evolved, why we're here, why you're here today, where are you going tomorrow, is all about what history is about. But specifically, what I want to talk to you about is preservation. I am a preservationist, partly because of what I do in my profession. I renovate historic properties, which in Decatur, our residential historic district is the largest residential historic district in the state. People don't know that. have Old Decatur, you know where Old Decatur is? Up near Bank Street. And Albany, which is just within walking distance across the park. You seen the plaques on the park area that describe the surrounding areas? Well, I was on the city council back in 1988 to 92, and at that time, one of the reasons that I went on the city council was because of my love for preservation as a volunteer as well as my profession, because I was seeing properties disappear. They would not be maintained or maintained improperly, they were being torn down, and we were losing our architectural heritage. And so what we did on the council during that period of time was we passed the historic zoning overlay, which is a zone that protects our historic districts and also controls how they are maintained. In other words, if you want to renovate your house or building in that area, you have to apply and have your plans approved. Why do you think that is? What if you don't know anything about preservation and you buy a house and you start saying, okay, I'm gonna add on? What might happen?
You don't know that you don't have a house.
Speak up.
You're not gonna have a house anymore.
I'm sorry.
You're not gonna have a house anymore
Why is that?
because you're gonna lose all your money.
Lose all your money? Well, you may not be able to build it back the way it should be based on the history of the house. So, anyway, that's why we have the Preservation Commission now, because they approve the remodeling of our older structures based on what's appropriate for that structure. So tell me, what do you think preservation is? What's the definition of it? I'm hearing a few little whispers. Tell me.
Doing the right thing and nobody's looking.
That's right. That's right. Doing the right thing when nobody's looking, but also maintaining something in the proper way. And why do we want to do that? What's the value? That's what we want to talk about today. What's the value of preservation? Why do we do it? Why don't we just mow it down? You know, why do we need that? Let's just build a new one. And the United States has been, in recent years, we've just become more involved in understanding the value of preservation. Because we used to just move to a new place and build a new place. You know, just kind of knock it down. We didn't have recyclables in housing like you have in anything else. But preservation is the highest form of recycling, because what you're doing is you're taking a property and you're bringing it back, you're maintaining it back to its original condition so it can be used. Maybe not the way it was before, but you can have readaptation of that property so that it can be used for the future. So we're just now understanding this country. Charleston was one of the leaders in this, Charleston, South Carolina. They had a very large inventory of historic properties, and they started early on having approvals and maintenance of their properties, and now it's a tourist city because of that, because you can see what was evolving in the area. Tell me what you think the reasons or the benefits behind preservation are. Give me some reasons why we do it. Keeping history, that's number one. So when you look at buildings, let's look at Decatur, for example. When you look at, and our oldest buildings in Decatur are the old bank. Have y'all all been to the old bank? So what'd you think? Did you like it? 1836, that period time frame. We only have, in Decatur, we only have 4 buildings that precede the war between the states, the Civil War. Do you know why that is? They were built, but Decatur was dismantled during the Civil War. Did you know that? People think that it burned, but it didn't burn. It was dismantled except for those 4 structures. Come on in. You're late, Mr. Fichet.
I'm sorry about that.
Well, we have 4 four structures that were built before the Civil War. And the reason they survived is because they were within, Decatur was occupied by Union troops. And so those buildings were used by Union soldiers. And the reason the rest of the buildings were torn down or dismantled is because the Union encampment there on the top of Bank Street where the old bank is, and they had fortifications all the way around, they were being shot at by Southern soldiers. So they just said, who were hiding, you know, in the other buildings. So they just said, well, we'll just tear all the buildings down so we won't have to worry about that. So we just cleaned out everything outside the fort. And the reason the fort was there on the top of Bank Street is because that was the crossroads transportation-wise in North Alabama. You had the river, east to west, and you had the railroad, north to south. So the Union encampment was right there to patrol the river and the movement of troops and supplies and so forth. So Decatur only has those four structures: the old bank, Nancy Pope House, the Tide House, which is in Old Decatur, and then the log cabin, which has been now moved to the McIntyre home property, but also the McIntyre home. And those were properties that were used, thank goodness, and we still have. So the rest of Decatur, what we consider the old historic districts today, were built after that time. Why do we have two downtowns? Did you know that we have two downtowns? What do you consider downtown? What's the main street downtown? Okay, Bank and Second, two different downtowns, connected by Lee Street. So Main Street actually is Second Avenue, the Main Street, Second Avenue, Lee Street, Bank Street, because Decatur was two towns. You had the old part that was developed in the 1820s on, that grew from the river down because people got off the boats and started building houses and kept moving across that way. And then the town was dismantled. And then after the war, is dismantled as far as the downtown, that area around there. And then after the Civil War, people came back in when peace was declared and it was safe to come back in. And they started building in what were the suburbs back then, which is now the Albany Historic District. So you had the old timers from Old Decatur, and then you had this influx of new people coming in, and there was a lot of rivalry. You know, it was the ones who had been here for a long time and their families, and then you had all these newbies that came in. So there was all this rivalry. So they made two towns, and Lee Street was the dividing line. It was no man's land. And back then, when the two towns merged in the 1920s, the two mayors met on Lee Street and buried the hatchet. Literally, they had a hatchet. They came together, they shook hands, and I don't know where that hatchet is, but it's someplace on Lee Street. Unless somebody dug it up and built it on. Anyway, that's part of that history of those two towns. So tell me what you think an advantage of preservation is then. It's understanding our history. We talked about that, so we know what happened before. Why is that valuable? It's after lunch, it's hard to think, isn't it? You were just dropped in the middle of Decatur High School without any knowledge about the history, the traditions, any of that. Did you know where you were going, what you were doing? So the value is understanding where you've been and that history. Part of it's good, part of it's not so good. And the same thing is true specifically in architecture. Did you know that our architectural history and inventory that we have right now describes us? People can look at our buildings and know a lot about our culture. For example, why do we have screen porches? It's hot. We live in the South and it's hot. So we go out there, when these buildings were built, there was no air conditioning. Can you imagine? Actually, when I went to Decatur High School, there was no air conditioning. Can you imagine that? We had windows and we had fans. Fans came later, but mostly windows. But you can tell a lot about our climate and our culture by looking at the construction of buildings. So think about living in a house that doesn't have air conditioning. What are you gonna do? You're gonna have, when the sun goes down, you're gonna wanna sit out on your porch, preferably screened. Why do you want it screened? Bugs, we have bugs here. Part of that is because we don't ever get really cold enough to kill off. We hope that we get a few weeks of sub-freezing temperatures so that the bugs go away and at least, kind of restart instead of just building on the population from the previous year. So bugs and heat. Why do houses in New England, which is north of us, have roofs that are sloped like that? Snow. Why is that important? Exactly. Snow, speak up so everybody can know.
Snow can make buildings collapse.
Snow is heavy. So if you have a roof like this, then when it snows, it's gonna slide off, right? In the south, we have roofs that are more like this. Why? And overhangs. Why is that? Hot, so we can get in the shade, because we don't worry so much about snow. Did you know that in New England, the early houses had their barns in the basement? Why do you think? Well, two things, so that you don't have to go out in the snow to the barn. And also because the warmth of the animals in the bottom of the house, what happens?
Heat rises.
Heat rises, so they're warming your basement. Natural floor heaters. So we've forgotten a lot of these techniques for survival because we're in our little enclosed houses and we have air conditioners and we just turn on that thermostat and get it right where we want. So a lot of that cultural difference is kind of disappearing because we're adapting ourselves to protect ourselves mechanically from the environment and dangers and so forth. Some other characteristics of houses in this area. Why do we have tall ceilings?
So you don't hit your head,
Well,
man. So you don't hit your head on the roof.
that's one good reason. But why are they really tall? I mean, houses, standard house has to be 8 feet, 8-foot ceilings. Why are some of the old houses 10 and 12 feet ceilings?
Is it because the heat rises?
Heat rises. So if you don't have air conditioning, get that heat up by the ceiling is just, what you want to do. And then a lot of them you'll see have that central hallway where you have a kind of a screen door application maybe on the front and on the back. So you can open that hallway and it forms a convective system where it cools you through the center of the house. Then as that cools, then that heat comes and it gets blown out. Have you ever seen a transom over a door? It's a glass panel over the top of a door. It's called a transom. You know what I'm talking about? It's an architectural detail that's very common in our area. Why do you think that you have that? It's movable. It opens and closes like a window. It's a window over a door. Now, why would you want to have that? Ventilation, exactly. And you don't have to open the door to get ventilation, so you don't have to keep your door open all night long and still be cool. So it's all about that ventilation, because you had to have natural convective ventilation. What about, have you ever heard of a sleeping porch? A lot of the old houses had sleeping porches. They might have been converted in recent years to be actually enclosed, but many of them had sleeping porches, so at night you could just go out on that screen porch, take your pillow and blanket, and sleep out there and be cool, rather than waiting for your house to cool in. What about the materials, some of the materials that are used in these older houses? Things like hardwood floors. Now, why do you think that was used?
No.
It was less expensive, but it was also part of the economy of that is, what do we have a lot of around here? Trees, exactly. Whereas, for example, out in the Southwest, where you have a lot of heat, just like we do, they don't have a lot of trees, so you don't see hardwood out there. What do you see? Pardon? It's okay, you can say it.
And carpet.
Well, carpet, but you'll see stone floors, stone, ceramic, porcelain tiles, those kinds of things. And the reason is, out there, unlike here, they have that heat gain during the day, and at night, the desert gets cold. So what happens is, the sun shines on that building during the day, and it warms it up, and the floor, and then it retains that heat during the night while the air is cool outside. So your location, your architecture is gonna tell you a lot about your location. So why do people, when they travel, have you ever traveled to other cities? Yes? Why did you go there, other than Disney World, and, so to see something different? And, if we all looked alike with new construction, like a mall, for example, one mall looks just like another mall, pretty much. But downtowns look different if they preserve their original structures. So part of it is that economic development and that understanding what's happening. Why do we go to Europe if we have the opportunity to do that?
Like the different culture.
Different cultures and architecture. Our historic buildings here, we're bragging about some that are being built about 1820s and 30s. Over there, they were built in 800 and 900 and, earlier even than that. So it tells about our culture, it tells about our history, and it also teaches us a lesson. What things have survived, what building techniques, what works for us in the South, what defines us from the South. Why do you have your homecoming parade downtown? Tradition? Why else? Why don't you have it at the mall? Can you visualize the difference and what that kind of means? When you talk about tradition, that mall is new, it's different in architecture. Nothing wrong with malls, they're great places to shop. But that has a different flavor and character that is kind of much more universal, and you see it anywhere. So when people talk about coming to Decatur for tourism and economic development, they want to see something new and, something different and unusual. Is there a difference in the quality of houses? Are old houses better than new houses? What's your thought?
They're usually built better.
They are built better, and for an example, the house that I live in dates from 1906. It's just within walking distance over here in the Albany district, and it was built with 4x6. You've heard of the 2x4 that we currently use for studs in the house when we're framing up the house. My house was built with 4x6s made of oak. And I realized it's oak when I try to hang a picture, and it bends my nail. And I hit that old stud that's in there. It's also an actual 4x6. It's 4 inches by 6 inches, so the structure is very strong. A 2x4 these days that is used for framing is a nominal 2x4. It's actually 1.5 by 3.5 inches because it's planed down. So it's even smaller than that, and it's made out of new pine. It's much softer material. My house was actually moved in the 1920s down a block. It was moved on, some mules pulled it from its location down the street, and it was intact because of its construction. It looked, they said, the ladies that I talked to who lived at that time, that was before my time. But the ladies that I talked to who lived in the area at that time said it looked like a bride that was left, left at the altar, because it was kind of sitting on that big wagon, and it had not been put in place yet, and it had porches and stuff hanging out, and it was kind of like it was just kind of listing out in the middle before they put it on its foundation. So an interesting history, but it gives you an idea of the structural integrity of older houses. They were overbuilt because you had lots of materials at that time, pretty inexpensively. And also the engineering details and the tolerances were, I don't know exactly what's gonna collapse, so let's just overbuild them. So they would always just let's just make sure it's beefed up enough. So the houses are generally gonna be structurally very strong, and also over time, you know, they get harder, that wood, like I said, that old oak. The trim pieces in there are, you know, crown molding that's deep, and a lot of it's hand done. You have plaster work, old world craftsmanship, so you have some wonderful old details. It doesn't really make an old house qualitatively better necessarily, but there are some structural advantages, and, you know, old houses have a story to tell. And that's one thing that I love about my profession is when I'm asked, and I do a lot of historic preservation, I'm asked to come in and renovate to bring things up to modern conveniences, improve kitchens and baths, and particularly because those would have been what we would consider substandard, because we're used to all the bells and whistles that we have today. But it's wonderful to get to go into a house and read the house, understand the scars. Now, why was that? Was there ever a wall there? What happened here? Was it opened up? Because houses do change over time. But that house, if you're careful and read it, you can understand the history behind it. So it has great value. I have a website up here. We have about, let's see, how many more minutes? 5 more minutes? 4 more minutes. I want you to write this down. DecaturAlabamaUSA.com. That is the city's website. Yes. Pardon? Yes, you may. You want to take a picture of it, that's fine.
I put it in my notes on my phone.
This is on the city's website, and you see it's /mobile//mobile/. This gets you to the historic walking tour supplements. You can see there are 3 walking driving tours that you can download to your phone. You can print it out and carry it on your phone or download it. And it tells you about the history of Decatur. The combined tour meaning that it's downtown commercial areas as well as the 2 historic districts that are now kind of combined in one. But within this, for example, Albany is the one that's right across from Delano, that within walking distance. And it gives you the history of the area, and it points out certain houses. And in detail, there are a lot more houses than this, but it just talks about kind of a few of the ones. It gives you the history of the district, why it was, how it evolved. This is the history that's so important behind the architectural preservation. And then it actually takes you on a tour, so you can drive, stop 1, stop 2. See, there's Delano Park and the Rose Garden. Everybody aware of Delano Park and the Rose Garden? Okay, it starts with that, and it takes you through the area. And you'll see that we have quite a number of beautiful styles, particularly Victorian, craftsman style, bungalows. We have some colonial revivals. Isn't that interesting? We have colonial revivals. In other words, colonial started 100 years prior. So we, even in our historic district, copied some previous good styles. You know, so we're continuing to do that even with our new neighborhoods. But you go back to the history of why they were and whatever they represent. So you can see this is our area that's close by within walking distance: Sherman Street, Jackson Street, and so forth. So I think you'll find, you know, the churches are included in this as well. So it talks about there's a Queen Anne, colonial revival. Anyway, great information, much more than I could tell you in 25 minutes. But in addition to that, then,
Teachers and students at this time,